Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell. As in all things that provoke an emotional reaction, comedy means different things to different people. But do the people in the audience and the people in comedy have the same opinion? And do the people in comedy even agree with the other people in comedy? My mission with this podcast is to talk to those people and find out. That's a lot of people. I'm the comedy nerd who's seen more than 1,500 comedians perform live comedy, and you can find out more about my journey in fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. If you like to hear what comedians have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a stand-up comedian, of whom I've been fortunate enough to see all their Edinburgh shows to date. She's a witty and erudite storyteller with a genuine sense of fun and playfulness. Stand-up comedian, Amy Matthews. Do you remember when comedy sort of became an influence on you?
It's an interesting question because I know lots of comedians that from like a really young age were like, oh, I sort of secretly always wanted to do this. And I can't say the same for me, but the first ever bit of stand-up I watched and thought it was magic was, I was probably 12, 13. I was at a friend's house and they had the Lee Evans Live at the O2 DVD.
Yeah.
And we'd play it like an album. We would watch it again and again and again and again and like learn it and quote it. And it was so, I just remember it feeling like a magic trick that you could just go, oh, I'd quite like to laugh today. And you could put a DVD in a DVD player and it would happen. That felt bonkers to me. So that was the first bit of proper stand-up that I remember engaging with. But I think earlier than that, I would watch a lot of panel shows with my dad growing up. You know, all of your QIs, your Have I Got News for Yous, your Mock the Weeks. That was such a staple Friday, Saturday night bit of television. In a way, it's strange because we're sort of losing that a little bit now because everybody, you know, streams and there's a bit of a generational divide between who watches television and who doesn't. And there's not those centralized panel shows that used to, you know, they were such a kind of a British staple, weren't they? And it's not quite like that anymore. But there's a real big part of me growing up was watching those kind of classic panel shows, and again thinking that it was magic that these people could just provide like say the funniest things in the world off the cuff. You know, you get further into this industry and the magic is less impressive, should I say. But it's, you know, when I was 13 or whatever, I just thought it was incredible. So that was my first cut. Those were my two early relationships with comedy, I would say.
Yeah. And at what point do you think that its influence on you inspired you to become a comic yourself?
That's a really good question. I engaged with the sort of emerging at the time, emerging comedians when I started uni, I think, which would have been 2016, 17, something like that. No, that's a lie. 2015. I'm sorry, my dates were all over the place. And when I started university, I think I was more like, oh, these new faces are popping up. And when I say new faces, they're now like the faces that are on everything, obviously. I remember watching, I think there were like a couple of Acaster videos floating around on the internet. I mean, at the time there were, I think, literally like 3 that were available to watch. I remember going to see Sarah Pascoe when I was quite young, and thinking that was amazing and magical and brilliant. And then I started getting into weirder stuff. I remember seeing Spencer Jones on something for the BBC and Paul Foote. I think I saw on Buzzcocks and then was like, oh my God, I love this person, and sort of sought out more of his stuff. So I think it was, around my first year of uni that I started really engaging with who was out there on the scene and who was doing interesting things. And I would say those kind of figures were the first people where I was like, oh, maybe I maybe I can give this a bash at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But that really was all it was. It was all the happiest accident, me getting into comedy. I wanted to go into publishing up until I did a master's degree, and right up until my master's degree, the plan was to finish it, leave, go to London, and go into the publishing world. And so it was it was a site, exactly. It was a sort of a lovely little idea that I didn't think would ever come to fruition. So, and now I can't imagine, obviously, my life without it. So, yeah, it's been a weird and wonderful, happy accident.
So did you do like a course, or what was your introduction to the stage in that sense?
In my last year of university, of my undergrad, I wrote a 2-person play that was supposed to almost operate as like a sitcom pilot. It was just a 2-person play in a sitcom format. And I did it purely as a bucket list thing of like, do you know what? I'm going to get older, more nervous to do things, and I'll have to take time off work. Whilst I don't have to do any of those things and don't have any of those hang-ups, I'm just going to take a 2-person play to the Fringe for 10 days. Knew nothing about it. Didn't know anything about the Fringe. And that was a blessing. That naivety was such a blessing. I did it, and a friend from school, who is now a successful stand-up in his own right, John Tothill. We both went to primary school and senior school. And he came to see my show, and he was like, you write like a stand-up, just try stand-up. It's a lot less aggro. And so when I moved to Edinburgh to do my master's degree, and so, right, well, I'm in a city where I don't know anyone. That's perfect. Signed up with the Edinburgh Review, the sort of comedy society, and did my first 5 minutes with them as a kind of, oh, well, that'll be a fun, silly thing to give a go. Whilst I was there in the building, it was at Monkey Barrel Comedy. I was a student, needed money, asked for a bar job there, applied, got it, ended up working the bar there. And then one night they had a dropout. And they were like, Amy, you've done a gig, haven't you? I was like, well, yeah, in a way. Do you want to pop on? It's a new act tonight. I was like, all right then. And I remember vividly in the wings, Liam Withnail was hosting, and he said, okay, next up in the competition is Amy Matthews. And I had no idea it was a new act competition. They don't actually do it anymore. But the prize was to come back a couple of weeks later for longer, and by some miracle I won it, and it was just snowballed from there. So it really is the happiest accident ever.
When you actually took to the stage, was it kind of what you anticipated?
I suppose so, in that it was there is something, you know, electrifying and addictive about speaking into a microphone in a room of people laughing. That's a really, you know, it's why we'll all go mad. It's a very unusual, you know, adrenaline filled pursuit. And I suppose that's got to start somewhere, hasn't it? And it must have started then, otherwise I think if I'd have had a tepid response, I mean, I don't mean an audience tepid response, I mean a physical, corporeal tepid response in my body, I think I'd have gone, oh, that was all right, and then left it. But I mean, it must have done something, because otherwise I wouldn't have done it again. So yeah, if I don't, you know, I really don't remember it that vividly. But as I say, it must have done something enough to go, oh, well, I've got to do that again.
So you started in, did you say 2016?
No, I'd have started in 2017. 17 or 18, because I started when I did my master's, not my undergrad.
Right, of course.
So I had my first gig whilst I was still doing my master's, and then started in earnest after I finished it.
Yeah.
2000. Gosh, it's so, the pandemic threw everything so badly. So first gig in 2017, but started properly in 2018, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's when you entered So You Think You're Funny?
Yes, I did. Again, yeah, this is fun, because there's so many points on the journey to get here that I don't ever think about anymore. So this is nice.
Let me tell you about your career.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Very helpful.
So this is what you did here. This is what you did. So you entered So You Think You're Funny within a year, really, but you went to the semi-finals?
Yes, I think so. Yes, I did. Semi-finals, yeah.
Yeah. So going into a competition like that, You've gone from your first steps onto stage to now being among peers.
Yeah.
So now you're socializing with a whole group of new comedians, but also you're in competition with them.
Absolutely. Those competitions are really horrible. And I think I've said this to new comics as well, if ever they've I would never give unsolicited advice, but if ever they've asked for it. With competitions, I think it's really important to remember that it's not really a reflection on how good you are at stand-up. It's a reflection on whether you can play that very particular game. And it is a game. There are so many incredible comedians whose style just doesn't quite lend itself to doing 5 minutes of punchy stuff like that. There's some of my favorite comedians in the world are slow burn, intricate storytellers that require context and build and light and shade, and you can't do that in a competition 5. It's a very particular style of stand-up that lends itself to that really punchy 5-minute set, and you get comedians as well, kind of there are competitions that force people to write in a very particular way, like I say, those densely packed 5 or 10 minutes or 7-minute pieces, and it means that if you're writing in that very particular way, some comedians find it really hard to transition from those competition 5s into your club 20 or whatever, or writing your first hour, because, as I say, it's a very particular way of writing and a very particular way of performing. And I think it can make you feel like, oh well, if I can't write like that 7 minutes for an hour, what's the point? And it's like there are so many other ways to do it. There are so many other ways to write comedy and to be a stand-up. So yeah, my memory of those competitions is quite faint, quite vague, but I remember thinking at the time, this isn't really what stand-up is. It's as I say, a kind of cattle market. It's a strange environment where, as you say, your peers are suddenly your competition. And I think I was quite lucky, actually, that when I was doing them, the people that I engaged with the most, I remember, I think, so for example, the BBC New Comedy Award would have been Jazzy Mew. He was, I remember he was in my heat, and we got on really well, and that was where I met him. He's wonderful, lovely. Who else was... This is the other thing. I really struggle to remember who was in my sort of school year. Who else was in my So You Think You're Funny? I can't even remember. Oh my God. I mean, you'd probably know better than you'd probably know better than me. Tanya Moore, I think, was also in my BBC New Comedy heat. It was, but I remember there being a really nice atmosphere. There wasn't, I don't know, backstage cattiness from people. I remember it being like a nice, supportive environment. And I also think that came from 5-6 years ago, whenever it was, that I think that was the start of career comedians, people coming out of uni and going, well, I'm just going to be a comedian, that's what I want to do, and that was the beginning of it. But I think competitions now, I had a couple of friends do competitions in the last sort of 2 years, and it sounds more cutthroat. It sounds more competitive. I think because the saturation of comics now is so huge, that it's one of the very few ways to leg up, so maybe I caught the very beginning of that, but it hadn't quite set in yet. So all of my experience of competitions didn't necessarily satisfy me creatively, or I didn't find them particularly artistically stimulating, let's put it that way. But they also weren't bad, they were fine. As I say, I think it's important to think of them as a game, as opposed to a judgment on how good you are.
Well, what about when you win the game? Because obviously you took home the Best Newcomer Scottish Comedy Award the following year.
Yes, in 2019. That was, again, it was a lovely thing at the time, and it was that that award meant a lot because I had moved to Scotland, and I'd started in the Scottish scene, and I'd got my sea legs in the Scottish scene, and that is still my, spiritual comedy home. And it meant a lot to be recognised in that particular scene, and it felt like a kind of seal of approval that I'd arrived there, and my stripes, and it's a very special, I mean, less so now, but criminally ignored comedy circuit. There's some of the strongest stand-ups I know live and work here, and it felt really nice to have that recognition, I suppose, very early doors. So yeah, that was a really special, that was a lovely thing. I think the Scottish Comedy Awards are now defunct, but it was very nice to have that recognition at the time.
Yeah. And of course, that same year is when I first saw you, when you performed Life Aquatic.
Oh, come on.
At Monkey Barrel at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Yeah, do you know what? More venues should do this. Monkey Barrel did. I mean, they've always been pioneers. They programmed half an hour shows.
Yeah.
When you're starting out, or actually even if you're not and you're working up new stuff, lots of people do double handers, right? So you do an hour split between you and another comedian. And David Blease, who was programming and is still programming the Monkey Barrel Fringe program, said, well, how about you just do half an hour? You don't, that's fine. And it's nice for a punter as well to be like, oh, it's £3 or something. I can take a punt for £3, and if I hate every second of it, it's half an hour. That's fine. That's an episode of something. You give a punt on an episode of something. And so that's what I did. I did half an hour of stuff that had, I'd worked up into a mini show, which was really fun and like really important for me at the time. I think it was nice to be like, well, yeah, this is still my show. I still get to market it as my show. But I get half an hour. And when you're brand new, that's plenty. that's plenty for both you and the audience. So yeah, that was a really important and lovely stage, and a really wonderful opportunity to have at that particular point in my career. I really loved doing that. That was great.
Yeah. So that was that your first time visiting the Edinburgh Fringe?
Yes, certainly as a stand-up. Yeah, as I say, a couple of years before I did the play as a student.
Yes.
That was firmly theatre. So yeah, it was my first ever dabble in the beast that is the Edinburgh Fringe. So yeah, that was, and do you know what? It was a really nice introduction to it, because you're not worried about awards and reviewers and all the nonsense and noise that comes with the Fringe. I was there to do half an hour of my show every day. So you get the experience of it being a marathon, and you get the experience of doing it to terrible ticket sales and then nice ticket sales. And, I flyered myself for that run. And I think it's really important to do all of that, understand the mechanics of it. And I remember, like, now when I have international comedians say, oh, what advice would you have to do? I'm thinking about doing the Fringe. My advice is always, and it's getting harder to do now because of the economics of it, is visit it first. Like, get a feel of what it is before diving in to do a month. And that half an hour show for that run was a really lovely way to do a kind of diet Fringe. So I did Fringe light, and experience of it, of doing it and being in it, but in a low stakes, really creatively freeing way. It was great.
Yeah. Well, then, of course, and you mentioned it briefly, about pandemic ruining everything. You've entered comedy, you've got an award under your belt, you've dipped a toe in the Fringe with 30 minutes, and then everything shuts down. So how do you respond in that scenario? What did you do for the pandemic? How did you bounce back?
I think it's really easy to look back on that time and obviously remember all of the bizarre bits about it, and all of the, the car park gigs and the the social distancing gigs, and the, all of the kind of strangeness of it. And I think the bit that, and this is a we're programmed this way for reasons so that we don't all go crazy. I think we forget how genuinely terrifying it was, because when I think about, I was living in Glasgow at the time, and with another comedian, and I just remember thinking, like, a year's worth of work had just been wiped. And I was looking at an empty diary and looking outside at empty streets and thinking, oh my God, like, no, I don't think I was even thinking about work. I was like, are we all going to die? Like, is that what's going to happen? And it was petrifying. It was absolutely petrifying. And I remember thinking, I literally have no money coming in, like, for the first time in my life. There's, I've worked a job in some way since I was 16 years old. I was like, I suddenly have no money. Like, it was absolutely petrifying. And it was obviously as well, we didn't know. It's all right on reflection to be like, well, that lasted, X number of months, and then sort of came back a bit, and then there was another couple of months. We didn't know that at the time. It was just this open-ended horror. And I think as I say, my memories of it are those weird, wonderful car park gigs, and sort of those first few gigs back where we were streaming at the Stand, or at Monkey Barrel, and doing gigs to just the other comedians in the room and streaming them online. And I remember that all feeling, as I say, there was novelty to it, and it was exciting, and like, oh, that's fun that we get to do this again. But I think if I really drill down into how I felt at that time, it was just fear. I was petrified. I was absolutely petrified that it wouldn't come back ever. We didn't know if everything was going to collapse.
Yeah.
And some people's worlds and jobs, it did. So yeah, it's my memory of the pandemic. I've got two memories of the pandemic. The one that I think of immediately, which is, as I say, the sort of novelty and the coming together to basically play gigs on a sinking ship. And the other one, which is when I really think about that time, which was it was horror. It was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. But you came back in 2022 with your debut show.
Yeah.
More Over the Moon.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that was a bit of a smash?
No.
I've read some incredibly good reviews for you. One of my favorite ones was that it seems like you've been doing it for decades.
This is very helpful and very kind, actually, because I have such a marred experience of that Fringe for a lot of reasons. And it's difficult because it's such a pressure cooker, the Fringe. And I think it's as I say, I had I was going through a very difficult thing in my personal life in tandem with the pressures of the Fringe. And the difficulty in my personal life really overtook how I remember that August. So it's very helpful and very kind and very generous of you to remind me that actually really lovely that, like, as far as the show goes, and I had lovely audiences, and felt I really liked the show at the time. It was nice to present that to the world after a few years of working stuff up, and it was. I think, as I say, my perception of that show and that time is very, very skewed by what was going on in my head and life at the time. So it's very, very helpful and very kind of you to remind me that actually, objectively, it was a nice enough run. It was, I think, because last year's show, sorry to jump ahead a little bit to 2023. I feel like I Made of Spiders felt like what I thought my debut should have felt like. And that's a really insightful thing to touch on as well, is that I think we all build up what a debut should do. Like, it should offer you, it should be your arrival, it should be your announcement onto the scene and to the industry and all of those kind of yucky businessy bits. And I think because my actual debut didn't feel like that, I was like, oh, well, we'll forget about that then. And it's quite nice to remember that actually, like, it did its own thing. And then my sophomore show was it gave me all the other stuff, and that's lovely, and I got to experience that as a more mature, better comedian, which which is really nice. But I do think it's, particularly if, I don't know, your listenership, I'm assuming you have lots of comedians and new comedians listening. There is such an immense disproportionate pressure on a debut, and you can sort of tell people not to worry about it as much as you like, that they won't listen, but it's helpful to remember that you don't get one shot at it. You get lots of shots. Every gig you do is a shot, it doesn't even have to be in the Fringe. But it was as I say, that 2022 was just tarnished slightly by a lot of other stuff, but the following year was the one where I had such a lovely Fringe last year, and I had such a lovely time, and I was so proud of the show, and I loved performing it every day. And it felt like that was my, if we want to be annoying about it, that was my kind of arrival. It did all the stuff the debuts are, quote unquote, supposed to do.
So that show last year, I Feel Like I'm Made of Spiders, which listeners can watch because it's on what's it on, Next Up?
It's on Next, and ITVX.
And ITVX. Yeah. Another great show, as you say. Maybe if that's what a debut is supposed to be, I mean, nailed it, because it was a great show.
Thank you.
Something you said about you maybe not being able to flex in doing 5 or a 10 spot. Obviously you did the 30, but now in the last 2 years you've had a full hour, and you can really spread your wings and tell the story. Do you see yourself as a storyteller? Is that the opportunity? You need that long form delivery?
I think I do. And I like doing both, and I try and train myself to do both, because my bread and butter is still Fridays and Saturdays, traveling to do club gigs around the country. And I still love doing that too. So, and I think it's important to have that in your arsenal. I certainly still enjoy being able to do those, like, punchline, keep an audience who have had 4 rum and cokes engaged, all of that stuff. Yeah. That's an important muscle to be able to flex. But as far as like, what do I get out of, like, what do I find most creatively satisfying? What do I think I'm best at? Definitely writing an hour. I found such a liberating, fun, interesting way of working, and I love that you can write light and shade into it, and that you earn the trust of your audience to be able to stretch your legs a little bit, 15-20 minutes in. Yeah. And you can be more playful with your pacing, and you can be more playful with set pieces, or I absolutely love that. And writing this new show for this year, I think last year gave me permission to be like, you can do that again in a completely different way. It doesn't have to be, it is and shan't be a rinse and repeat of the kind of stuff I did last year. It's going to be very different, in fact. But I really like that I get to go, and I can involve lighting design and sound design. And I had a friend very kindly say to me once, and she does a lot of, she's a movement director. She does like choreography and things. And she said, one of the things I really like about your stand-up is that it feels like I've watched a film after it. And it was such a meaningful compliment, because it touched on something that I don't think I realized I was striving for, in that I want to be able to do cinematic stand-up. I want it to be intensely visual. I want it to feel like it's got scale, and that there's there's an artful poetry in it as well. I didn't just want it to feel like, joke. I think it can be so much more than that. So yeah, I think, with each year and with each gig, you find out more about what kind of comedian you are. And I think I want to really lean into that more and more with each show. So yeah.
The character review on stage, your persona, I wondered how close that is to you. You deliver with a poise that seems like very assured, and obviously you're doing this sort of cinematic It's very assured delivery. Are you mindful of your persona specifically on stage?
Do you know, I think comedians are, I mean, it sounds like an odd thing to say because we have to be very self-aware. Like, you have to know how you come across. You have to know how an audience are going to read you. That is like, that underpins your act, you know. But we're also dreadful at being objective about our like own comedic style, or you know, we're not historically very good at that. One thing I think I am mindful of, I'm far more direct and high status on stage than I am in life. I am the opposite of that in real life, so make of that what you will. But I had my director, Elf Lyons, the incredible comedian herself. She said the other day, we were in a meeting, and she described my onstage persona as a combination of Miranda Priestley from Devil Wears Prada and Philip Larkin. I really like that as a combination, and is something that like I wouldn't touch. She was like, you can be quite sharp on stage. She was like, you know, there's a charm and a warmth there, but she was like, you can be quite sharp. And it's something that I was like, yeah, I suppose I can actually, because I don't really have that gear in real life, that I don't realize it could be quite spiky on stage, which is yeah, not something I have in my arsenal day to day. So that kind of yeah, that sharpness hopefully has its edges softened by the fact that, you know, I try as much as possible to be light and whimsical and warm on stage as well. So I think there's a playfulness between those two threads, you know, that they're my Jekyll and Hyde, I think. Philip Larkin and Miranda Priestley, there you go.
What about comedy as an entertainment? Do you still watch comedy? Are you able to watch it the same way as you might have once before?
The short answer is no. Usually, you know, I mean, I gig 5-6 times a week, and then when I'm not gigging, the last thing I want to do is watch comedy. But that being said, there are a few comedians that I can still watch and not watch it like a stand-up. So, you know, like, I mean, the most relatable comparison is, you know, when you're at school and you're doing something for English and you're taught how to analyze passages from a book, and then for a little while after your GCSEs or your A levels or whatever, every single time you read a book, you can't help every time it mentions the weather to think, oh, pathetic fallacy. Like, you could, that gear is now in there. It sort of ruins reading for a little bit because you can't not analyze it. And that happens for stand-up. So you can't watch comedy without trying to look at the cogs. Like, you can't marvel at the machine. You have to sit there like an engineer and work out how it's being done and how it's working. And there are a few comedians that I can still watch and not feel that. And that feels like magic, you know. That's a lovely, lovely thing. So I try to still watch comedy where I can. And also, I mean, when I'm gigging, I make a concerted effort to, if there's someone on the bill that I haven't seen or someone that I really like, you know, their stuff, I always sit and watch. You know, I think I do a lot of my comedy watching at work. You know, I do it less and less at home. But I try as much as possible to, and also as well, you know, when we're at festivals or whatever, I always go and see shows. I don't just want to be there for mine. I also increasingly love watching work in progress shows, because there is a lovely looseness. There's something really nice about seeing comedians show their working. I think it's people talk about, oh, things that you can't say in comedy anymore. It's all bollocks, to be blunt. The stuff that is actually taboo in comedy is sincerity. Like, comedians are so bad at being sincere. Like, we everything is lacquered in irony or lacquered in faux vulnerability. And I think in a work in progress, you see a vulnerability and a sincerity that you don't get in a polished show ever, no matter what kind of show it is. So I increasingly watch work in progresses as opposed to finished articles, because I find it more fun. More fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'd agree with that. I love works in progress. I volunteer at the Leicester Comedy Festival, so I'm there in February, and then I got the preview season over the summer, and then I go to Edinburgh, and I like to, if I can, I'll see a work in progress in February, and then another in sort of June, July, and then I'll see the show in August. And it's
amazing,
completely changed.
A really fun process to watch happen. It's because also, and I can't think of another art form where you really get to see that. You know, you can enjoy an EP or an album, or go and see someone live on tour. You don't get to be there during their jam sessions. You know, like there's something really cool about the fact that you can literally track someone's working, and because there's no other way to do this job or practice this job without just doing it. You know, sadly, we can't tinker around on a guitar in private and be shit in private. We have to be shit in public. And you guys get to see it.
Yeah, and there's a great joy when you have a comedy savvy audience in one of these intimate nights, and the artist has the comfort and relaxation to be able to cock up. Basically, they know it's fine because everyone's on board. We're not going to slam you for it, you know.
Absolutely right. And it really, also those nights are the most important, in that because you have the confidence to experiment and be free with stuff, the best ideas come to fruition. And that's when when risks are taken, and the coolest stuff comes out, you know, at the end. So yeah, I think it's as I say, there's so much merit in going to see early stage work in progress stuff. I think it's really fun for both, you know, comedians and punters. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. When you're putting together a show, do you keep things in just for yourself? Maybe like a little in joke, or something that didn't work, perhaps. But you say, well, I'm gonna keep it anyway.
Absolutely. There was a joke in More Over the Moon, and there was a joke in Spiders that I kept in basically just for me. There's always like a one or two or a sprinkling of audience members that love it, that for some reason, for whatever reason, it doesn't smash a whole room as a collective, but the people that like it really like it, and for them I'll keep it in. So yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, it's your house, you know, ultimately you can invite people into it, and you know, your audience ends up being people who enjoy being in your house. But and there are going to be people who you invite to your house, they come, they don't love it, and they won't come back, and that's fine. That's their prerogative, as it is, you know, my prerogative to build it how I like. Yeah, there are absolutely a few soft furnish in there that are just for me. Few ugly pillows.
So I know that you, as well as being a comedian, you're also a writer, actor. Where do you find yourself most comfortable? Is it the writing? Is it the performing?
I've learned more and more about myself over the year. I mean, as everyone does over the last few years, in that I really thrive on variety. And I think it's one of the reasons why I love this job so much, and I'm so accidentally suited to this job, is that if I'm doing one thing constantly, I start to crave the other. And it's great for productivity, because you find yourself, you know, if I'm writing loads of stand-up, my brain sort of goes, oh, you want to cheat on stand-up with writing scripted stuff right now, don't you? And you're like, yeah, I do. And so I'll do a bit of scripted stuff for a bit, and it feels like I'm being naughty because I'm not doing a thing I should be doing. And then by the end of it, I'll have a script, and then I'll be so sick of doing scripted stuff. I'll be like, you sort of want to do some live bits, or you know, and like it works really well because I can spin lots of plates. And that's where I thrive. I like having lots going on. It will also ultimately be my downfall, I'm sure. I really like having a little bit of everything. I genuinely love the live performance. I love the process of writing. I like doing scripted stuff and getting to escape into worlds where I'm not at the forefront of it. That's another thing as well. There's so much ego and vulnerability involved in doing stand-up as yourself, no matter how much persona is there. If you're doing your job properly, the audience don't know that. There's something really nice about scripted stuff where I get to demote myself from being at the forefront and be like, I get to actually construct a little world that I can visit, and where the characters are far more important than me, and that's really nice. So yeah, I really genuinely like the mix. I'm always very uncomfortable with being called an actor, because it feels like a gross imposter thing to say that I'm an actor. I've done acting.
I've seen Scott Squad.
Well, thank you so much. You're right. I played that. I played that smart ass from Essex very well. So, it's not a huge departure from. I didn't have to go too method for that. But again, I really enjoyed whenever I've done acting bits. I've loved it, and it's been really fun. And I just like. I think I really like novelty. I also really like finessing things, and comedy gives you so much space to do both, which is so rare, because I think usually novelty comes at the expense of being able to master something, and being able to master something comes at the expense of novelty. And comedy is a very rare space and very rare medium where you get to do loads of both.
Yeah. We mentioned a little bit about watching other comedians. So obviously you've got writing credits for things like Breaking the News, Have I Got News for You, and so on. You're writing for other people there. So do you, like, in your own process, you might write a club bit for yourself, and then you sort of, well, I wouldn't say that, but that's the back burner for Breaking the News or something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think bizarrely, I don't know, this making me think of this very particular thing. Do you know the comedian Roscoe McClelland?
I know the name, I haven't seen him before.
Very, very good Scottish comic. He is the opposite to me, stage presence wise, in every way. He's skittish and like bonkers and shouty, and he's so punk. And his stuff is superb, but we present very differently on stage. However, whenever we gig together, and we're very good friends, so we're not just like giving each other unsolicited tags. Whenever we gig together, each of us suggests like a way to take a joke, or like a direction in which to take a joke that the other one didn't see, that's perfect. And we can, as I say, completely different comedians, but there's clearly something in the way we both work, or our minds both work, where we're really good at punching stuff up for the other one. So there's been loads of situations where each of us have gone, have you thought about doing that? You go, oh my God, no, I didn't. That's great. That's really good. So there's a world in which we could both probably write each other's shows. But if we were to perform each other's shows, it would be horrendous. We're so different. But yeah, I think there's definitely times where I've thought of punchlines or ways of doing things where I think, oh, that's really funny, but it just does not suit my voice at all. It's, and as I say, I think there's been, and I can't think of an example, but there's certainly been times where I've gone, oh, I had this concept that I've never quite been able to make work, but I think you probably can, because it would tag on the end of that bit you're exploring, Yeah. Definitely that happens. And it's fun because you get to, I would love to, write for people. I find it really fun. I really like inhabiting other people's brain spaces for a bit. You get that, you flex that muscle a lot when you're writing scripts, because obviously you holiday in a character's brain for a little bit, and often your characters are very, very different from you. So yeah, I think there's something really fun about getting to do that with stand-up as well.
Yeah. What about directing? Because that's a similar sort of thing, putting yourself in their mind and delivering their comedy the way they would do it.
Absolutely. And I would absolutely love to do that. And if I do say so myself, I think I'll probably be quite good at it. I just also feel like I want to really earn my stripes before I go into directing. I think there's I want to feel like, particularly, I mean, if you're charging somebody as to direct their show, which you absolutely should, it's a job. It's a very important job. If you are asking somebody to part with money to get your opinion and your guidance and your direction, I would want to really feel like I'd earned the right to do that. And I want to basically get to a point where I'm like, I think I'm comfortable charging somebody for my expertise. And until I feel comfortable doing that, I won't do it. But I think eventually that's something I would love to do. And I think as well, something I love is that it's collaborative. So much of this job is solo, it's completely you travel to gigs alone, you write alone, you perform it alone. And directors are one of the rare opportunities in this line of work where you get to be collaborative. And I love that aspect of it. So down the line, definitely, that's something that I'm going to look into and try and stretch my legs there a little bit. But for now, I'll, as I say, I'll wait to earn it. I'll earn the right to do that.
Well, we've talked about your Edinburgh show, More Over the Moon, about main character syndrome. We talked a little bit about Feel Like I'm Made of Spiders from last year, which is about change and uncertainty. What about this year? You've said about your show coming up, which is Commute with the Foxes.
Yes.
What's that all about? What can we expect?
So this year's show is going to be about, the shortest way I can put it is it's about the transformative nature of context. So how much context and reframing utterly changes meaning or flips meaning on its head. I think there's a few things in my personal life, like the personal thread of the show, where that's a theme, looking at something completely differently and it, changing the direction of my life. But there's also a lot of observational stuff in it. I think in a world that is increasingly individualized, we all have an individualized algorithm. We all live quite separately and individualistically, that context and meaning has become so slippery and so difficult to there's so few common kind of like what we talked about earlier, in that everyone would sit around and watch the same thing together on a Friday night, 20 years ago, whatever. It just doesn't happen now. And about how everyone has a completely different relationship with various things because of an individualized way of consuming media and content and interests. So it's got a personal thread and it's got an observational thread that are interwoven, but the common theme is about how context completely transforms meaning and the implications of that, basically. It's a much more sparkly, upbeat show than last year. Last year had a lot of light and shade, and this year is hopefully gonna dance in the light a little bit more. So yeah, it's gonna be a really fun, textured, still theatrical show. There's I hope going to be lighting design and sound design, and it's going to feel immersive and full of trinkets. There's no audience interaction or reliance on an audience at all. In fact, you, as I say, you're coming to my house. There we go. I hope that the show feels like a little holiday into my brain. That's the immersion aspect, I think. But yeah, it's going to feel hopefully a warm, fun, light show that still, has got hopefully moments of poetry and theatre and poignant bits in it. But it's a lighter show in general, which I'm really excited about doing. I think it's going to be really fun.
What about your Edinburgh experience as a whole then? As the social aspect, the industry aspect, how do you find Edinburgh, the festival?
Well, there are so many different answers to that. As I say, I've experienced a really challenging one that felt like the longest month in the world. I've also experienced one that felt like a party from start to finish. So, I'm glad I've experienced both ends of the spectrum, because I think it's steadied me for a stable way to enter into this year's. I'm really excited about this year's. And one of the things I genuinely love about the festival is, obviously, we're all traveling Wilburys. We all are just somewhere different every few days, and we all get to see each other for 2 hours every 6 months, and there's something really lovely about being like, do you know what, we all just get to be in the same, albeit horrific, petri dish for the same month. So that's always a really lovely aspect of it. I try as much as possible to also do things that are completely not festival related. So for example, like last year, it was really lovely. Once a week, me and my dear friend Josh Weller, very talented, funny comedian, we did a breakfast once a week, the two of us, where we just nattered about everything and anything. Sometimes we spoke about shows, sometimes we really didn't, and that was like a lovely thing to have. So I'm going to try and do that as much as I can this year, is make sure that I genuinely spend quality time with people, not just green room time with people. So yeah, I think that's the aspect of it that I really love. I also love getting to meet new audiences every day. That's like a lovely aspect of it. You get this demanding crash course of having to do your show every day for a month, but the flip side of that is you get to experience the show differently every day for a month. You've got a new set of people every single day, and that's so lovely. And there have been audiences that I've looked out at the beginning of a show and thought, oh, you're going to be my people, and then it's been fine. And there's been audiences that I've looked at the beginning and gone, I don't know if you're going to go for me, and it's been fantastic. So I love the element of surprise you get with having a different audience every day, and also just getting to see other people's shows. I'm one of some people really don't want to go and see other stuff, certainly for like the first week or so. I love going to see other people's shows because it makes me feel excited for mine, and it makes me feel inspired to work on mine. And yeah, I love that aspect of it. So the short answer really is the community aspect of it. I love, and I'm so excited for. But yeah, there's also a lot of it that's obviously very, very difficult and very demanding. And I think with every year you get better at understanding and dealing with that. So yeah, I feel robust going into this one. I'll speak again in September.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I'm feeling good.
What so far do you think have been your best and worst experiences in comedy?
In comedy, let's do worst first, then we can end on positive. There's it's a strange job in the sense that it requires you to take so much of yourself on stage, and every comedian has received awful news and then had to go on a stage, put a mask on, and do 20 minutes of light-hearted jokes about toasters or whatever, even though your world's just fallen apart. The most difficult time I've ever had in comedy was trying to balance when really difficult stuff is going on in your real life, and you've then got to go on and be a court jester. That's really hard. And it's emotionally so draining to do that, and it's necessary. You gotta. So I think my most difficult time in comedy was genuinely that Fringe, 2022 Fringe. I found very, very difficult because I was balancing a lot of challenges in my personal life whilst doing an extremely demanding thing in my professional life, and I found that really difficult. That was easily, as I said, that's a sort of bracket of time that I found the hardest. The best, I tell you what's a really nice, as I say, there's loads of lovely gigs, and getting to tour my show last year was a privilege, and loads of really nice things. But I tell you a nice, neat, sort of full circle moment that would perhaps be nice to share is when I first started, I'd done maybe like 5 gigs or something. I'd spoken to my parents about it. I'm very lucky to have a very supportive family who love that I do this. I think it's really fun and great. So I told them that I'd started, as I said, 4 or 5 gigs at the beginning. And my dad was, before he retired, he's had lots of jobs over the years, but one of them was he used to survey power lines. So that if a tree was getting too close to a power line, he would instruct tree surgeons how to basically prune it to make sure there's people's power doesn't go out. That was his job before he retired. And what he got sent to somewhere in the countryside, and one of the trees that he had to survey happened to be in comedian Ed Burns' garden. He turned up and he said, "Oh, it's you from the telly. You've got a tree quite close to a power line in your garden, and we're going to need to do some work on it so that the power doesn't go out in your house, basically." And Ed very kindly, obviously, gave him the permissions that he needed to send to the tree teams, blah, 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 blah. Now, my dad's job started and ended with sending that information to the tree teams. Then that's their job to action it. He retired. But whilst he was in Ed's garden, he said, "Oh, my daughter started comedy." As I say, I'd done like 5 gigs or something. And Ed very patiently asked, "Oh, really? Who's that?" And then he said my name, and he said, "Oh, okay, well, maybe one day we'll cross paths," kind of thing. And then this year, Ed very kindly asked me to be his tour support. So I'm now on tour with Ed, and on, I think it was the second date we did, we were driving from Ed's house to whatever the venue was, and I woke up to a text from Ed in the morning, because I was meeting him later that day at his house. And Ed texted me in the morning and said, "You won't believe this, but that tree has just hit the power line and our power's gone out." And this is like 5 years later. So the tree team didn't actually. And it was just so bizarre that, the morning that we were going to support, I was going to support him on tour at a theatre somewhere, I can't remember which one it was. That morning was the morning that tree that my dad had surveyed 5 years ago eventually outed their power. So if that's not a full circle moment, I don't know what is.
Amy, how can we find out about you and where we can come and see you perform?
Sure. So I'm my main social media that I use is Instagram. I don't have TikTok, sadly. It's at Amy F. Matthews. Also online, I'm www.amymatthewscomedy.com. All of my stuff will be accessible through there. I've got work in progress shows coming up, obviously the festival itself. Then I go on tour with the wonderful Little Wonder in autumn, but if you want to view stuff online, it's as I say, on ITVX. My Comedy Central episode is up on YouTube now, which is nice. Everything will be on Instagram, Amy F. Matthews, or on my website, amymatthewscomedy.com.
And so my last question then, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
Cesspit feels harsh. How would I say? It's a circus. There we go. In every way possible, it's a circus. It's full of characters, full of malpractice, full of fun, full of nonsense, full of danger, full of silliness, and a lot of travel. There we go. It's a circus.
Amy, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for such lovely questions. It was really wonderful. Thank you.